Morning, everybody, and welcome to the Payments Leaders Show, where I have a fireside chat with handpicked leaders from the payments industry. And they share how they lead their people, how they build a culture that is both a winning one and a human-centered one. And also where they embrace the opportunities before they meet the challenges. Now, we all know in the payments industry, trying to scale a business is tough, and trying to build a culture which enables people to succeed whilst achieving the aims of the organization is challenging, but from a performance perspective. Vitesse was established to fix the costly and outdated payments process and take friction out of the payments process. Today provides customers with a smart way to interact and make global payments every single day. Recently received £26 million worth of funding, and vital to that growth, though, has been the building of an inclusive culture that would attract and retain talent. And many people I see the headline figures when it comes to investment, but actually, if we just stay with founders and their small group of people, we're never going to scale a business. And I'm really excited today to introduce Steve Newton. So Steve is the Chief Commercial Officer, having previously been an EVP at WorldPay with responsibility across Europe. He has had a consistent track record of building strong teams of high caliber sales and relationship management to deliver significant growth. So Steve, welcome, and thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. I know you've had a busy day already. So
Indeed, no, thank you for the intro, Adrian. Great to chat today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I wonder if we could dive straight in. So I wonder if you could share some of the choices that you've made in your career to date.
I think for me that the two choices I've made really are in the sector that I've chosen to specialise in and work in for the last 20 years, and alongside that the kind of nature of the roles I've done. So I have worked in the payments sector for over 20 years. I'm really passionate about it. I love the fact that the service that we are providing to our customers is absolutely core and integral for them to operate and grow and serve their customers. And I've had the privilege of working over those last 15, 20 years across so many different sectors, whether it be retail, travel, airline, gambling, now insurance with the Vitesse business. And I think that, having that experience serving all of those different sectors and having to develop that really deep expertise with regard to the sectors you're serving alongside the payment expertise that you need, that needs to be relevant to each of those sectors is really key, because all of those different sectors that I've described have very unique problems and challenges that they're facing, and I love the challenge of working in that payment sector, sitting across the table from people in different industries, solving different problems with something which is really core. So I've spent a long time in the sector, and I will only ever work in the sector. I genuinely love it. I think in terms of the choices I've made, I think very early on in my career, I chose to start in sales and commercial roles. I've spent the vast majority of the last 20 years working in relationship management and business development, moving into sales leadership roles. Again, had the benefit of leading sales teams all over the world, which was an unbelievable experience, not least in terms of the different cultural challenges and differences that you face across the US, Europe, different parts of Asia. And having spent a very significant amount of time in sales and commercial roles, did want to try something different. I spent a short period of time in operations leadership. That was at WorldPay. And I think when you spend so much time sitting, meeting with customers in a variety of different sales roles, you get intimately familiar with regard to the challenges that the business that you're working for has in terms of serving those customers. And I wanted to bring some of that kind of experience to bear in terms of an operations leadership role, which was a really good experience for me. But then following on from that, moved into business leadership and spent 2 years at WorldPay heading up their business in the UK and Europe. But all of that experience has been in kind of large global corporates. The choice I've made a couple of years ago when I joined Vitesse is to try something very different and join a small business, a fintech that's trying to scale up, which is a very, very different experience from the very large global corporates that I've spent so many years in.
Wow. Thank you. What's really coming across there, and I love this, is the obvious passion you have for people the passion you have for customers and the passion you have for connection. So yeah, wonderful. I wonder if we could just sort of segue in there and just, you're obviously responsible for driving commercial success throughout the business. How do you ensure that relationships are developed and they're inclusive, and also they start with a customer empathy and a customer connection?
Yeah, okay. So, I think when you think about relationships externally, first of all, you have to think about how you're building really solid relationships internally, particularly if you are in a customer-facing role, particularly if you are in a sales role. I mean, you are effectively sat serving your customers, representing every function across the business, whether it be product operations, technology, compliance, legal. So whenever I'm leading a sales team, I will always really impress the importance of that, of those team members really genuinely investing in their internal relationships, their internal network, building that trust, constantly doing people favors and helping people out, because you never know when you're going to have to ask for a favor in return. But I think if you start with those really solid internal relationships, you are far better placed to serve your customers really well. And I think that leads on to your question with regard to, how you build those genuine customer relationships with empathy. And I think that, again, if I'm sitting with a member of my team trying to kind of help guide them in terms of how to do that, I think you have to start with, whether it's the individual you're sat with or the broader business that they represent, really developing a fundamental understanding of the problems and the issues and the challenges they face, alongside, just as importantly, what the opportunities they have that you can help them exploit. And I think that until you gain that really solid understanding of your customers' problems and opportunities, and find a way to help solve some of those problems and help unlock some of those opportunities, you're never really going to build a strong long-term relationship based on kind of trust and mutual benefit. So I think if the customer feels that you understand them, you understand their business, and that everything you are doing is to serve and help them, you built a really strong foundation. I know from experience working with people where, the moment a customer feels that an individual of the team is not looking after their interests, they're looking after their own personal interests, you've got no foundation and no trust.
Fascinating. You mentioned so many things there. A word, reciprocity, springs to mind there. Was there a point in your career, sorry to segue a little bit, but was there a point in your career where you went, actually, this is a smarter way to do business? I come from a strong sales background myself, and to start with, many of us are taught how we learn how to sell, and then we sort of get to a point where we almost undo it and go, I tell you what, let's build relationships first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say, at one point in working with WorldPay, which was, growing at a really healthy rate, a very successful global business serving customers all over the world with, thousands of people across different sales roles. I look back at the moment of transition there was when you genuinely start to invest in a consultative sales process, and you stop people going to a customer doing a presentation about your business, because to be frank, they don't care. And you really encourage people to spend time and energy doing proper discovery and learning as much as they can about the customer's organization, taking that information back internally, and then pulling together a very specific proposal to take to a customer, which, to my earlier point, solves that problem and unlocks that opportunity. It's you should never sit in front of a customer and talk about who you are and what you do until you fundamentally understood more about what they're looking to achieve. And that was a really important moment of transition, I would say, for WorldPay.
Brilliant. Yeah, I've heard, well, it's interesting for me. I have a separate part of my business called Enterprise Sales Club, which focuses, unsurprisingly, on people who sell enterprise-wide. Every one of them leads with listening and asking prominent questions. Every one of those who's that successful does. So I can definitely relate to that on every front.
Absolutely. In every sales team I've ever led, the most successful people in those teams are the best listeners.
Yeah, I've got to say, and I call it, everybody needs a damn good listening to. And I've yet to meet anybody. I had an interaction this morning of I was trying to concentrate on something, and I've always got one of those faces where somebody thinks I can solve a problem for them, and I just listen to them for 10 minutes and they solve their own problem. I ask them 2 questions and they solve their own problem. So I could definitely relate to this. So, Steve, I've heard that as a leader, you are committed to lead with decency. And whilst that seems very obvious and very normal, actually, there's a lot of leaders who don't, and they tend to lead with task only. Yep, highly driven. That's why leaders are in it. Can you tell us where that comes from and how you overcome the prevailing way of leading only with task?
Yeah, I think what comes before that is recruiting the right people and great people. I think from my perspective, you need to recruit people who've got the right attitude and the mindset. They may not have necessarily the right level of requisite experience that you need, but you can teach that. If you've got a fast learner, they can learn what they need to do in terms of the customers they're serving and the business that they're working for. So for me, you have to build a team first and foremost with the right attitude and the right mindset, the right kind of passion and drive and positivity. But from my perspective, in terms of my approach to leadership and trying to get the best out of a team, I think you have to start with a really clear view of where the business is going, and just as importantly, what is expected of the team. What are we looking to achieve? For every member of the team, being really clear about what you're asking of them and what their objectives are. I think it's absolutely important on a continual basis to be really open and upfront, to provide clear feedback, not just in terms of an annual performance review, but day by day, week by week, to provide really clear feedback on what's working and just as importantly, what isn't working. I genuinely find that most people we work with are really open to that feedback and really appreciate that kind of guidance. Particularly where there are development areas that they need to work on. I think when you on from that, I think when you have the right people in the team, you've given them clear direction, you're really clear on what's expected. You have to give people the space, the time, the autonomy, and the empowerment. But alongside that, you have to have really high expectations. Yeah. And I think that I've seen people in different businesses, leaders, who have very high expectations, but they don't necessarily tolerate people making mistakes. I think if you're really clear on what you expect, you've got very high expectations, but you allow people the space to make mistakes in a safe environment, but fully expect for them to learn from those mistakes. I think that leads to a really positive culture where you've got the foundation of trust and openness generally.
Wonderful. Sorry, Steve, I'm just wondering which segue to go down there because there's so many that I'm interested in. Can I just come back to the recruitment one? Because obviously it's a passion of mine. Obviously talent is a passion of mine. You said to me previously that you love hand-picking talent. You love that process. There's very few people who say that. Like, I'm going to capture that, I think, for that, because there's very few leaders who actually say that. So when you're spotting talent and you're saying, actually, I'm recruiting for attitude, I'm recruiting for mindset, I'm recruiting for even curiosity, etc. How do you test that and identify it when you're in those interactions? Because so many leaders, again, recruit for the role and then go, oh, you've done that before, you can do it again over here.
Yeah, look, it's very, very challenging because you often only meet people for an hour or two before having to make a decision. So yep. I will only interview face to face. It's almost impossible to really build any kind of relationship or get a sense of someone interviewing on Teams, which I appreciate has been challenging over the last couple of years. But for me, it's actually spending material time getting to know someone, what motivates them, what gets them excited when they get up first thing in the morning, and try to understand what kind of mindset they've got and what they're looking for in their particular kind of changing career choice. And if you get an understanding of where people get their energy from, what motivates people, what gets people excited, that conversation can quite easily lead on to the kind of experience they've got and whether they've got a good kind of professional fit for the role. But for me, it's just about trying to get to know someone in a limited period of time and to understand what kind of mindset they've got. It doesn't always work, but generally, I think if you know what you're looking for and you know the kind of person you're looking for and the right kind of attitude, I think you can build a really strong foundation of a team on that basis.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. I think it's no, that's great advice, because it builds trust early on as well. And I always look at the recruitment process as a continuum. So many people look at recruitment, then induction, and then actual performance. Well, actually, in an ideal world, the whole thing should do this, because after the recruitment process should be okay. Well, we know these are some of your gaps, but you're a really good fit and you're hungry to learn. So I love that. I love that process you have there. So again, just how do you then, just in terms of retaining people and keeping them motivated, how do you again just think beyond the task? Because you're saying, look, we've set the standards, this is where we're heading, there's a regular feedback. How do you create that safety to make sure that that feedback is well received? Because again, many of us have been on the receiving end of feedback we either didn't want or we don't like. How do you make that safe?
I think you have to, start on day one as you have to continue. You have to set the scene that, to let people know that that kind of constant discussion and that constant feedback loop is healthy for them. It's healthy for us as a team. It's healthy for the business. I think it's important to do it with humor. I think you have to give people the context. I mean, every single one of us, no matter what job we are doing, faces challenges every week. Every single one of us makes mistakes every single week. And I think if you can build that trust and have that very open, frank exchange and dialogue from day one, so that people know what to expect and they know that you are providing feedback with a sincere intention to help them be more effective in what they're doing and to help them develop their career. 90 times out of 100, 99 times out of 100, people are very open and receptive to that. I just think it's about setting the tone on day one and continuing on that basis from there on in, really.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So just sort of switching gears a little bit here, who have been the most influential people in you becoming the authentic leader? Because you really strike me as somebody who shows up, is very comfortable to be you. Yep. And which people and environments have been most influential on you?
Yeah, I've worked for some incredible and diverse people over the last 10, 15, 20 years. I think if I look back over the last 5 or 10 years, two people spring to mind, both of whom were senior leaders in my previous organization, one the group CEO and one a divisional CEO. I think when I think back of their influence on me and how they helped develop myself as a leader, I think they had some certain shared characteristics.
Okay.
Both of them had extremely high expectations of individuals and teams in the business, really high standards. They were both uncompromising in a positive way, and I think they both led with authenticity, openness. On the other hand, I think both of them had very different aspects and attributes, which again I learned a lot from. One was absolutely focused on the importance of constantly learning and developing. If you work in the payment sector, you work in the in technology, nothing stands still. And the day you haven't learned something, the day you haven't developed, is the day you start to go backwards. So that importance of continuing to learn and strive and improve your knowledge and mastery of what you're doing. I think the other leader was very focused on genuinely getting to know every member of the team, a genuine care for the team's well-being, managing with kind of humor, humility, openness, honesty. I think I learned a lot from both of those individuals, as different as they were. But I think in terms of how I or anyone else develops in terms of being an authentic leader, I think the people I've worked with over recent years who I consider to be genuinely authentic are those people that were happy to show that vulnerability and that openness and honesty. And I think I think as a leader, if you're happy to show that you are vulnerable and you can expose to people your weaknesses as well as your strengths and be your true self, I think that does build trust, and I think that's the basis of being authentic and real and open and honest.
How do you strike that balance then, Steve? Because you've got on the one hand there providing direction, providing faith and strength that we're going into the unknown. We don't know we're going to win. We'd like to win. Yep. And this is where we're heading, by the way. And they're always challenging numbers, whatever we're facing in the scale up. How do you balance that strength and demonstrate some vulnerability as well?
I think it's acknowledging that it's always a team effort. It's not about the individual. It's not about the member of the team. It's not about me. If I'm working with a member of my team on a very significant, really important deal, that individual and myself will bring different strengths and areas of expertise to that. We both got different strengths and weaknesses. I think it's just acknowledging that, regardless of the fact that I'm leading the team, I don't have all of the answers. I've got people that have got far greater perhaps sector expertise than I do, and I think it's just making sure that individuals within the team are effectively greater than the sum of their parts, and making sure that it's a team effort.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's a great phase, great term I've seen before, that sales is the team game. And I think a lot of people forget that. If you ever look at any large enterprise deal or anything of any substance, there's very rarely, if it's ever one person either side that's made that happen, both sides of an organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. So what do you wish you knew early on in your career and life that you know today? You can go back as far as you want, when you were 21, when you were 27.
Oh, I think there's 2 or 3 things that I think are all kind of quite closely linked. If I could have a conversation with my 18-year-old self, I would say, always try to see life and the world through other people's eyes and perspectives. I think if you can try to understand people's motivations, why they behave the way they do, where they get their energy from, what frustrates them. If you can endeavor to see the world through someone else's perspective, you will find common ground and you will build trust. It's not easy to do. Sometimes you don't get it right, but I think too few people actually spend a few minutes before a particular engagement or meeting or interaction without trying to understand where they're coming from and why they're acting or behaving the way they are. I think that's really important. I think we're kind of leading on from that, Adrian. I think we're all working and living in a world where there are so many strongly held views and conflicts and disagreements and differences in approach. I strongly believe that the truth is always somewhere in the middle, and I think that judgment is so important, and I think that judgment sometimes comes with experience, but I think it also comes with acknowledging that if you're sat with 2 people and they've got polar opposite views on something, the truth is somewhere in the middle, and it's finding that sweet spot and helping kind of people find that compromise and that way through. And I think that in turn leads directly to the last point I'd make, which is kind of pick your battles. Choose the right time to compromise and choose the right time to fight your corner. Don't fight every battle. You're trying to win the war, not every single battle. And it isn't a sign of weakness to compromise or back down. Just pick your moment. And maybe one more, if I may, Adrian. A chap I work with at WorldPay always made the point that I think is not often referred to too much, particularly in the workplace, which is always prioritize your health. I'm not saying I've been as good at this as I could have done, but there are plenty of people I work with here who are very ambitious, really hardworking, wanting to get ahead, doing a really great job. But you can't ever do that at the expense of looking after your health. If you look after your health, your career will look after itself. And I wish someone had told me that when I was 18, 19 years old.
Well, I can certainly relate to that one myself, when especially when I was younger. I love the way you've connected those 3 things, because they actually do naturally layer one on the other in terms of how they're doing it. Well, Steve, this is normally the point where I sort of try and make sort of 3 or 4 pieces of summary on this, but I'm going to really struggle, because I've written down here about 15, I think. But perhaps if I could just pull some sort of common themes together here, if that's okay. What I heard, and what I love to start with, whether you're actually a leader who does actually love handpicking people to join the organization and leading with attitude, and it sounded to me like cultural fit first, because then saying, okay, we'll have an honest conversation right at the beginning about where their strengths and their weaknesses were. And also a belief there that by balancing between giving people knowing what motivates them to start with, and then giving them the autonomy, yet setting the expectations and balancing those two things actually is more likely to lead to high performance. And an honesty as a leader about turning up authentically yourself. And you say it was interesting how you sort of compared how there were some common traits that certain leaders had about showing up with their honesty, their humility, and their humor. Yet very different priorities in terms of how they went about that. It was clear about what they were doing, but how they did it was different. And then also, again, that struck me about that balance between being a strong leader, showing direction, yet building trust by demonstrating a level of vulnerability. And I think the other one that was salient point for me was, trying to observe the world from other people's perspectives, and then just respecting actually that we all have different value sets, we all have different positions on the world, yet actually at some point in business, we're going to need to get along and do things. And the final one for me was obviously make sure you're looking after your own health and your own energy, because you're not going to be able to perform at your best. But if you do that, you've got a chance of delivering in business.
Absolutely.
Were there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation?
No, I don't think so, Adrian. I really enjoyed the chat, and so thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you.
Well, look, Steve, I really appreciate you taking the time out this. I know the audience, there's so much wisdom in there, particularly around people, performance, and I think that real balance of, quite often people think this is the way, whereas actually everything struck me with you as a leader, it's about striking a balance and walking that tightrope. So really appreciate you taking the time out today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Adrian. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.